Order for, and I understand that our testifier has to leave by 3:30 to catch a flight. So we'll go to 3:30 with questions for him. And I understand Secretary Simon had a family emergency and had to get called away. So that's why he's no longer here. So members, where were we at? Representative Senator Carlson, were you done with your questioning or did you have?
Never.
He's a senator. That's right, he's a senator.
I do have
Senator Carlson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'll direct this to Julie, or Ms. Strother, sorry. We have the flag system in our voter files that prompts using the, using the ability to certify at the polls. And we certify at the polls because we do have same-day registration, and the action is the same as same-day registration. Who has access to the voter file to maintain those flags? Now, I think there's like at least 4 flags, questionable citizenship, questionable residency, whether they're able to vote after a felony conviction, and competence, if you're under guardianship. Who puts that information in, and is that a larger group of people?
Ms. Struthers.
Mr. Chair and Senator, so there are actually more flags. There's additional flags for, like, if a postal verification card is returned, we would flag for checking the address. There's some additional flags. Voter statuses are only changed at the county level, so we house the data at the state level, but it's at the county level, and it's only county officials who are allowed to update a voter's registration. They're the keepers of voter registration statuses, even though we're the keeper of the system. We get that data that is used for the flags, pass it down to the counties, but they're the ones who actually add those flags to the data. Does that make sense?
Senator Carlson.
Okay. Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And now the question, similar question to Mr. Preetz, and that is that, for instance, well, do you have flags like that? And I guess, we discussed the voting after incarceration, and maybe you can describe any flags that you have like that. And I guess I'm specifically interested in the incarceration issue, where in Minnesota you can't vote if you're a felon and you're out either on probation or parole.
Sure.
Mr. Preetz.
Well, so that is not a flag that we have because our rule is a custody rule. So if once you're released from physical custody as a felon, your voting rights are restored, so they'd have to re-register. But there are other flags, voters where we've got a concern about residency and they fall into an inactive status. They've got a different identification requirement at the polls. I think I alluded to earlier the idea that if you request a mail ballot, but you don't bring it with you to the polls, there's a flag requiring either an affidavit or down the provisional path as each county displays it. Much like Minnesota, the impetus is on the county election officials. All the rights and responsibilities with respect to these statuses are maintained at the local level.
Senator Carlson.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. And another question is, do you purge voters from your voter file? In Minnesota, we purge if you don't vote in 2 successive presidential elections.
Purge is a tough word because it's fairly loaded, but there is a process for removing voters from the rolls that line up with the National Voter Registration Act of 1992. It requires us to send mailings, move folks from one status to another, and then ultimately, upon meeting all those legal requirements, we can remove them from the rolls. Luckily, since the institution of election day registration in Illinois, the downside risk of doing something improperly for any given voter is greatly diminished because we've got the insurance instrument of election day registration to correct a mistake that's done at the local level.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Lane.
It's okay.
Any other questions of this testifier? Well, thank you, Mr. Prats. I think, thank you for coming and thank you for sharing with us what what happened in Illinois and a different perspective from another state.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. It was an honor to be before you all.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to testify? Mr. Heller. Please identify yourself for the tape.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson and committee on this HAVA. My name is Rick Heller. I officially represent the twice exceptional in House File 1370 or Senate File 2566 on line 118 or in Education Statute 120B15. I provided a handout for your administrator about the current document that's not online. It's the one from the last testifier from out of state. Hopefully you'll get that posted online. It does sound like they provided to you in a timely manner. This also likely relates to your, the next item I'm going to talk on is the side-by-side, and it has to do with your current bill called 1962. The headers do not read out loud on the side-by-side. Hopefully, as we move ahead on accessibility for the Minnesota legislature, to provide more civic engagement with the printed word. And perhaps you may entertain it on the floor to provide for the working group, which is really a closed meeting group, closed meeting law group that provide a porthole for the public to provide input other than the 4 employees or staff in the House and Senate. So basically, that's in a nutshell. I've already expressed before. If you go to lines 113 in the joint bills, and then lines 114. Lines 113 is improving accessibility. It's my understanding that, correct me if I'm wrong, the Secretary of State's here, their staff, that they can only use this specifically for HAVA. Currently the Secretary of State is a constitutional office. They don't have to apply the accessibility law, and consider that for a bill next year on this. But right now, that'll help to improve the accessibility of people wanting to vote and getting access to that information. The second one I spoke on back in March with those Heller handouts had to do with the training materials. That's on line 114 again. And the judges aren't required to pronounce those words. It's a local decision when the machines that read out loud don't read out loud. Maybe I'm splitting hairs, but I don't know how many spoiled ballots are out there that people can't spell the words correctly in the write-ins, especially English as a second language. Obviously, it's probably at discretion of the locals to decide. And now with us deciding one of the 4 parties that we're going to be voting to help figure out what name is on that ballot. So those are the things I have to add to this process. And again, I look forward to working with you, Mr. Nelson, on that bill 1962 on providing that. And thank you again for this opportunity to speak. I'm open to any questions if anyone's interested in that.
Any questions for the testifier? I see none. Thank you, Mr. Heller. And the document that you talked about that was given, that we just got this morning, and
I understand that.
Yeah,
It's,
so-
again, that one thing about this process about accessibility is one thing, but timely helps your piece out, and hopefully the bill will capture that. Because it doesn't express the word timely, but the functionality piece for the public to provide more feedback in the next 2 years or a year on this would be important to add a few pieces, not just a closed meeting for the employees here, because I do understand that the legislature wants to be an equal opportunity employer, and you want to get that house in order before you approach the public. Thank you again for this opportunity to speak.
thank you. Anybody else that would like to testify before the committee? Well, seeing none, and seeing that we have our compatriots on the conference committee from the Senate have not showed up, Any further discussion? Representative Vogel.
Mr. Chair, and I know there's been trouble having everybody get together on these meetings. I do think now when both houses, or both chambers are running, I do think or did hear that the state government finance bill might be up right now over in the Senate, the other body, which may have precluded some attendance today. So I don't know how we do this, but just, you know, so that people are aware that this time there may, because of all of these conflicting things, that it will be difficult possibly to get people together, and I applaud you on your efforts. Thank you.
Well, Representative Vogel, we put the notice out and we asked them, and if they had gotten back to us, they would better time. But they didn't get back to us at all. This notice has been out for over 2 weeks. And so, I mean, and previous to that, the last meeting we held, that they did not show up at all. So, like I said at the beginning of the meeting, the way the rules for conference committees go is the gavel goes back and forth every other day. Senator Kiffmeyer could have called a meeting on a Monday, Wednesday, or a Friday and has not done that and has not communicated with us about what she wants or even come forward with a offer to us. So it's a matter of, this is the first opportunity. This gentleman said he could come up and speak to us, and the day was the day he could do that, so we set the meeting up to do this, notified the Senate. They haven't showed up. So it's like us, we're on the floor also, and as we've had to leave a couple of times because of the call of the House, we've got, this happens a lot with this time of session when we have conference committees, is they'll be meeting while we're in long sessions and have to go back and forth. So there could have been a way for them to get here. So.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I applaud your efforts on trying to put it together. Just,
Thank you, Representative. And members, with that, if they're seeing no other business before this committee, Representative Dehn.
Well, thank you, Chair Nelson. And, you know, this conference committee has been open for a long, long time. There have already been several bills that have gone through the House. Conference committees have met. They have resolved the differences, and we've been able to pass them and move them on to the governor for signature. And I hope that this doesn't portend to what the future is going to be for conference committee when we have difficult things to deal with. You know, the Senate and the House are very far apart on some of our bills. And if the way in which we are going to address that is just by not wanting to negotiate, you know, I think would be foolish to think that we'll have our work done by May 20th. But I would just hope that, you know, at some point conversations would take place with the Senate that we can actually resolve this conference committee prior to taking up the state government finance bill, which we're going to be taking up, which I know this is in there and part of it, because this should have been the easy lift and the easy thing for us. And for some reason, this has become one of the most difficult things that we've had to deal with so far this session. So I just hope that this isn't an indication of what the future lies when we realize that the Senate and the House may be far apart on issues, whether it's transportation, whether it's issues of public safety, or many of the other bills that we're going to be bringing forward. Because if it is, I'd say cancel your summer plans, folks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Dehn, I hope that's not the case. I hope we can get our work done, but I do, too, am a little frustrated in going forward on this. And this would be nice if we could have got this, if we could get this part of the state government finance bill out of the way. We could take it out of it, make it a little less controversial, but there should be no controversy to this. It's a shame that this is being held up at what it appears to be as the bargaining chip for the end of session and or a bargaining chip for other things. This is, I think, too important, our election security, to have it be held up for a bargaining chip on something else. So with that, members, Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want to say that I don't know that we've had something that has been such a small amount of money with so much controversy in it. But this is an extremely important issue. I think we've heard it from our testifiers, and we've heard it in the papers. I have here page 50 of the Mueller report, and I'm going to read a bit of it here just to make sure that I'm quickly doing this, but by at least the summer of 2016, GRU officers, now GRU is the Russian intelligence, sought to access state and local computer networks by exploiting known software vulnerabilities on websites of state and local government entities. GRU officers, for example, targeted state and local databases of registered voters using a technique known as SQL injection, by which malicious code was sent to the state or local website in order to run commands. And I'll leave the rest of it. Anybody can read it, page 50. This is something that's really critical. It's something that we should be doing. And I'm going to say that there was enough Senate members to do a vote. 4 of us came here. We're in the same committee, and I'm interested in that very same bill. But we came here because this is very important, and it is not something that we need to just kick aside and wait until later. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Lane,
Yeah, I just,
Senator Lane.
I'm just feeling that the clarity around provisional balloting, could use a few more words, that provisional balloting in other states in the past was created for the purpose of letting people vote who couldn't register ahead of time, like 30 days ahead of time. So it allowed them to vote same day. And when you have same-day registration, you don't need provisional balloting then. As we have in Minnesota, we have a same-day voting, and we actually have the verification that you can vote requires a visual ID and a verification of your address. So it's more stringent. And so there's no need for any provisional balloting in Minnesota. The very partisan so-called provisional balloting that is being offered by the other side here as almost if you give me that, I'll give you this kind of thing, is a different sort of thing, and it would be used with her same-day registration as a way to call out people and not let them vote, except, quote, provisionally. So its intention is not to support our American right to vote, but to actually attack it. It's a totally different kind of, quote, provisional balloting, and it just cannot be. And I'm sure I have heard the governor say, I am not giving anything for HAVA funds. We just need the HAVA funds.
Thank you. With members with that, we're adjourned.